February 27, 1942, 23:45 hours. Over the English Channel, the air inside the Armstrong-Whitworth-Whitley bomber was a vibrating, frigid hell. It smelled of fuel, engine oil, and the faint, sour tang of nervous sweat. Flight Sergeant C.E.H. Cox, a 30-year-old radar technician, sat huddled on a hard metal bench, a man of science surrounded by 120 stone-cold killers. He was not a soldier. He was a boffin, a man whose hands were trained for the delicate work of soldering irons and oscilloscopes. Tonight he clutched a heavy canvas bag. It held a set of pliers, a crowbar, a revolver he barely knew how to use, and a parachute he had worn exactly twice. He was the single most important and most vulnerable man in the entire operation. Around him, the commandos of C Company, 2nd Parachute Battalion, were a study in coiled menace. They were led by the impossibly young Major, John Frost. They were checking their Sten guns, sharpening their commando daggers, their faces black with cork. They were preparing for a battle. Cox was preparing for a burglary. In his mind, he saw the grainy reconnaissance photos of the target, a lonely cliff-top villa on the coast of occupied France, and next to it a strange 10-foot-wide dish. The Germans called it Würzburg. British intelligence called it the Führer's ears. It was the secret to Germany's air defense, a weapon so precise it was systematically gutting RAF Bomber Command, night after night. It was the one piece of technology that could, if left unchecked, allow Germany to win the air war, make D-Day impossible, and seal the fate of Europe. And his mission, while 120 men fought and died around him, was to run up to it, under fire, and steal its heart. The red light flashed on. The dispatch officer roared, "Action stations!" The commandos stood up. Cox, his heart hammering against his ribs, stood with them. He was a scientist about to jump into a war zone, all for a piece of wire. By early 1942, the strategic air war over Germany was failing. RAF Bomber Command, under Sir Arthur Harris, was launching its dehousing campaign, the only way Britain could strike back at the Reich. But the losses were catastrophic. Night after night, the sky was filled with the burning pyres of Wellington and Halifax bombers. The attrition rate was approaching 8 to 10% per mission, a rate that was not just unsustainable, but would destroy Bomber Command within months. The reason for this slaughter was a single, brilliant, and terrifyingly efficient system, the Kammhuber line. Conceived by General Joseph Kammhuber, it was a multi-layered air defense network stretching from Denmark to the Swiss border. The line was a series of overlapping boxes in the sky, known as Himmelbett, four-poster bed zones. Each box was patrolled by a single Luftwaffe night fighter, a Messerschmitt Bf-110 or a Junkers Ju-88, equipped with its own airborne radar. But the real key was the ground-based radar that guided them. First, a Freya radar would pick up the bomber stream at long range. Then, as the bombers entered the box, the night fighter was scrambled, and a second revolutionary radar took over, the Würzburg. This parabolic dish was a marvel of German engineering. While the British were still using clumsy mattress radars that could only give a vague direction, the Würzburg could lock onto a single bomber and provide its pilot with a constant, precise stream of data, range, bearing, and most critically, altitude. The German ground controller could literally see both the bomber and the fighter on his screen, guiding his pilot until he was just 200 yards from the bomber's tail. For the RAF crews, it was like being stalked by a ghost. They would be flying in what they thought was the safety of total darkness, only to have their aircraft suddenly erupt in 20mm cannon fire. The Würzburg was the eye of the needle. It was the weapon that was winning the war for Germany, and the British knew they had to blind it. But to blind it, they first had to understand it. They had to know its exact frequency, its pulse repetition. They needed one. The problem fell to combined operations, the brainchild of Lord Mountbatten and the RAF's Chief of Scientific Intelligence, Dr. R.V. Jones. The reconnaissance photos of the Würzburg at Bruneval, on the French coast near Le Havre, were perfect. It was isolated, perched on a 300-foot cliff but accessible. A smash-and-grab raid was possible. The mission, codenamed Operation Biting, was given to Major John Frost and C Company of the newly formed 2nd Parachute Battalion. They were the elite of the elite, but this was to be their, and the Parachute Regiment's first major airborne operation. The plan was a symphony of unprecedented complexity. The drop 120 men would parachute from Whitley bombers onto the snow-covered fields just behind the villa. The assault. The force would split into 3 groups. Nelson would fight down a ravine to secure the beach for extraction. Jellicoe would assault the villa and the main German garrison. Drake, led by Frost himself, would attack the radar dish. The Boffin. Attached to Frost's group was Flight Sergeant C.E.H. Cox. His job was not to fight, but to use his specialized tools to dismantle the radar's guts, the transmitter, the receiver, the modulator, while the battle raged around him. He had been trained on a crude mock-up and had been given a simple instruction. Get the guts. If you can't, take photos. If you can't, don't come back. The extraction. This was the most dangerous part. Parachuting in was easy. Getting out was the problem. They could not fight their way back to the plains. The plan called for the Royal Navy to dash into the small beach at the base of the cliff, under the muzzles of German guns, and pick them up. It was a raid that relied on 3 different services: Air Force, Army, and Navy, working in perfect synchronization, at night on an enemy-held coast, all to get one unarmed technician 30 minutes with a piece of electronics. The risk was total. For Unteroffizier Erich Paulus and the 50-odd Luftwaffe technicians and signals troops garrisoned at the Bruneval Villa, life was good. Their posting was a quiet one. Their Würzburg station, call sign WIM, was state-of-the-art. Their job was to scan the skies, guide the night fighters, and then listen to the victory reports. They were untouchable. Their defenses were formidable, designed to repel the one attack they did expect, a seaborne commando raid. The villa itself was a fortified barracks. The radar was surrounded by sentries and machine gun nests. Crucially, a larger company of 100 German infantry was billeted in the village of Bruneval just 600 yards away, ready to counterattack any landing. And at the base of the cliff, commanding the small beach, was a concrete pillbox with a heavy machine gun. German arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. The Herrenrasse, master race doctrine extended to technology. They knew their radar was light years ahead of the British. The idea that the British would even understand what to do with it was laughable. And the idea of an airborne assault? It was madness. Why would anyone parachute in, only to be trapped between a 300-foot cliff and a German infantry company? The villa was secure. The secret was safe. They were, as one German officer wrote, in a box seat for the war. February 28, 1942, E0:15 hours. The night sky over Bruneval erupted. The 120 men of C Company, jumping at an impossibly low 400 feet, hit the deep snow. The drop was a success. Major Frost, his Sten gun ready, gathered his Drake group and began the silent 1,000-yard march to the radar. 25 hours. Charge! With a high-pitched yell, Frost's men opened fire. A German sentry at the radar dish, who had been stamping his feet to keep warm, looked up just in time to be cut in half by a burst of 9mm rounds. The machine gun at the radar pit opened up, a slow, heavy thump, thump, thump. The commandos answered with grenades. The fight for the dish was over in 30 seconds. "Cox, go, go, go!" Frost screamed. Flight Sergeant Cox, his canvas bag banging against his side, sprinted through the snow. He arrived at the 10-foot dish, his lungs burning. He scrambled behind it, found the metal housing, and shone his shielded torch. His blood ran cold. This was not the mock-up. The German engineering was different. Compact. Alien. "Oh, bloody hell," he whispered, simultaneously. The Jellicoe group, assaulting the villa, ran into a wall of fire. The Germans were alert, firing from the windows. The Nelson group, meanwhile, was in a desperate fight down the ravine, trying to silence the pillbox on the beach. 30 hours. Cox, his scientific delicacy gone, grabbed his crowbar. He smashed the panel, revealing a glowing nest of vacuum tubes and wiring. He didn't know what was what, so he took everything. He cut the cables, put his boot against the chassis, and ripped the entire transmitter-receiver unit out of its moorings. He shoved the mangled 50-pound block of metal into his bag. He took the dipole antenna from the dish. He took every component he could see, or 35 hours. A whistle blew. "Withdraw! Withdraw!" The German reinforcements from the village were on their way, their truck headlights visible on the road. The commandos pulled back, firing as they went, converging on the ravine that led to the beach. Cox, half carrying his bag of gold, stumbled and slid down the icy path. 50 hours. The entire company was now on the shingle beach, but the sea was empty. The landing craft were not there. They were 15 minutes late. Above them, on the cliff tops, the German infantry had arrived, setting up mortars and machine guns. A green flare hissed into the sky. Fire! The beach was suddenly illuminated, and a hellstorm of fire raked the commandos. They were trapped. This was the moment the raid failed. This was the moment they were all to be killed or captured. The German commander on the cliff was in a state of shock. An airborne assault. It was impossible, but the men on the beach were real. He gave the order to annihilate them. Mortar rounds began to walk across the shingle. Major Frost, calm in the chaos, signaled with his torch out to sea. Flash, flash, flash. He could hear the thrum of engines. Suddenly, 3 motor gunboats and the landing craft of the Royal Navy roared out of the darkness, their own guns blazing. They hit the beach, ramps down. Go! Go, go, wounded first! The commandos scrambled aboard, the water up to their chests. Cox, helped by 2 paras, hauled his precious heavy bag over the gunwale. The landing craft backed off the beach, their 303 machine guns returning fire at the cliffs. As they sped out to sea, the British coastal batteries at New Haven, 100 miles away, opened up, firing a pre-arranged barrage to cover their retreat. By or 1:30, they were gone. The Germans, stunned, stared at the empty beach, the bodies of their comrades in the snow, and the gaping, violated hole where their Würzburg radar had been. They had captured 2 wounded commandos. The British had captured 2 German radar operators. But more importantly, CEH Cox, soaking wet and freezing, was sitting in the back of a boat, his hands bleeding, cradling the entire secret of the Kammhuber line. The commandos returned to England as heroes. But the real victory, the true psychological shock, was happening in a quiet basement laboratory in Britain. The bag of mangled, crowbarred, and saltwater-damaged components was unceremoniously dumped on the desk of Dr. R.V. Jones. To a layman, it was junk. To Jones and his team, it was the Rosetta Stone. They worked on it for days, and the revelations were game-changing. The frequency. They confirmed its exact operating frequency, 560 megahertz, on a 50-centimeter wavelength. The design. It was a transceiver, meaning the same dish sent and received the signal. A huge leap in efficiency. The weakness. It had a very narrow, focused beam, which is what made it so precise. But a narrow beam, they realized, could also be easily fooled. For the German High Command, the psychological effect was one of pure, unadulterated shock. They had been intellectually and physically violated. Their secret was gone. Luftwaffe command was furious. The British, whom they considered technically inferior, had not only dared to attack, but had done so from the air, and had known exactly what to steal. An immediate panicked order went out. All coastal radar stations were to be heavily fortified, their components welded down, and surrounded by rings of anti-aircraft guns and infantry. Thousands of German troops were pulled from other duties to guard dishes, a direct result of the raid. The intelligence from the Bruneval raid was the single most important intelligence coup of the air war. It immediately allowed the British to do 2 things. First, they built a jammer, codenamed Carpet, that was precisely tuned to the Würzburg's frequency. But the second, and far more decisive, invention was window. Dr. Jones and his team now knew that if they dropped strips of aluminum foil, cut to exactly 25 centimeters, half the radar's 50-centimeter wavelength, they would resonate and reflect the Würzburg signal. A single bomber could drop thousands of these strips, creating a ghost signal on the German radar screen so large it would look like an entire fleet of bombers. The narrow beam radar, its greatest strength, was now its greatest weakness. It could not distinguish the real bomber from the thousands of ghosts. The Allies, knowing this secret was their ultimate ace, held window back for over a year, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came in July 1943 during Operation Gunnerside, the devastating air raid on Hamburg. The first wave of bombers dropped window. The effect on the German Kammhuber line was instantaneous and total. The German radar operators' screens dissolved into a blizzard of snow. The ground controllers, blinded, screamed in panic. The night fighters, with no one to guide them, flew aimlessly through the sky. The RAF's losses on that raid plummeted to almost 0. The Kammhuber line was broken. It had been rendered obsolete in a single night. The Bruneval raid, the smash and grab for a few electronic parts, saved RAF Bomber Command. By saving the bomber offensive, it allowed the Allies to systematically destroy Germany's industrial capacity, cripple its war machine, and, most importantly, draw the Luftwaffe into a war of attrition it could not win, ensuring Allied air supremacy for D-Day. The weapon that could have won Germany the air war was defeated by 120 men, one scientist, and a crowbar.